emotional every time I see it. Because I think sometimes we settle as a church for things that are easy for us. And when things get difficult, we're ready to surrender. I'm convinced, and I know that in my life there have been a myriad of times that I've just wanted to give up on various things. And I'll watch this, and I don't know, it's like an infusion, an injection of energy to go, to keep on going. And for you that may or may not be familiar with the clip, it's taken from the movie Facing the Giants. And I immediately thought of that. I think of that when I think of the story of David and Goliath. And I have sensed for a couple of weeks that God is saying, Jim, you need to elaborate more on my servant David and what he went through on that day that he was inducted into the national scenery of victory that he had over Goliath. And we're all familiar with that story. In fact, the world is so familiar with the story of David and Goliath that it has become embedded in our society. And we hear often how we face our Goliaths, and we're just a David. And so I've been looking at this, some phenomenal things. I hope that I'll be able to share a number of them with you that deal mainly with simply facing our giants and not giving up, not quitting. It deals with our confidence and where our confidence lies in. I think that sometimes, I can't speak for you, but for myself, sometimes I put myself not in the position of Brock or the coach or that 160-pound linebacker or whatever it was that was on his back there, but I put my position or myself in the position of those other players that are sitting on the sideline and watching. And you know where the emotional part comes in for me is when in the process of making that crawl across the 100 yards of football field is when those players begin to get up off their knees and their hind ends, and they begin to say, he's going to do it. He's going all the way. And in disbelief, they see that there's something possible that is within their reach. It was said in that there's something about, if we lose confidence in ourselves as leadership of the church and as the church itself, then how do we expect the world around us to have confidence in our march? I believe that we all face a myriad of situations. I believe that we all face giants in our lives. And I just want to share with you chapter 17 of the book 1 Samuel is a long chapter, 58 verses. And you are so familiar with this, I'm confident, that I'm not going to read all 58 verses for you. But I want to share with you some excerpts out of each section. And actually, you can divide chapter 17 into no less than 4 different categories. There is the battle background that we're going to talk about and the things that the Israelites were facing at the time. The coming of David, where did he come from, and what was the circumstances of young David. I'm convinced this morning that many of us are young Davids. Sometimes we are the Israelite army that stood upon the hill, and at the barking of this gargantuous giant, we cower down in fear because we don't want to face that giant. But we see it divided into verses 1 through 11. The battle background. It's going to build a scene for us that'll tell us exactly what David has coming. we'll see the calling and the coming and how David is introduced into this battle, which tells us in so many words that oftentimes we get up in the morning and we start out on our day and we have no idea of the extent of what God has intended for us in that day. Sometimes, Brother Dwayne, you get up in the morning, as you have well experienced, and your day might crumble before you because of the tremendous oppression of some sort that has come into your life. And we oftentimes we fail in those tests that God has put before us. The third part in verses 31 through 40 has to do with David's coming before Saul and the audience that Saul had and David had and the interaction as David is going to prepare to go and to fight this gigantic man. And then the last part deals with the battle that David has with Goliath in the end and how he has victory over that. And so I want to look first of all this morning at these four things, and then I want to share with you 4 battle plan truths that we can have as soldiers. I thought about this morning, that one of the things that I am confident that God is doing in the life of the church is that He is calling out men and women to come and to be giant slayers. I don't know how many of you would succumb to that or not. How many of you would say, yeah, I'll go fight it. What's a giant? What's another giant? I'll fight him. And that's typically the response that young David had. But most of us, again, are going to be, myself included, are going to be like the Israelite army. Do you know that Saul was probably the most likely man that would go and fight? The Bible says that when the people of Israel had asked for a king, that God says, I don't want you to have a king. I've given you a man of God to lead you, and you don't need a king. But we want to be like our neighboring countries. We want to have a king. And so God gave them Saul, who He says was not only was he a good-looking man, but he was a head taller than all of the rest. And so size-wise, Saul probably would be the most likely candidate to fight. And so we have in those first 11 verses, we have the scene that has been set up for them. The Philistines are fighting the Israelites. And I can't help but think in my mind that the Philistines were far better gunned than David and the Israelites were at that time. The fact is, as I think about and as I read and studied about the military might in those days, the military was built up of 3 different entities or 3 different parts in the military. One was called the cavalry. That was your horsemen. They rode horses and chariots, and that was a mighty force in any army. In fact, is probably one of the most mesmerizing, difficult forces that there was in any army. And the Philistine army, the Bible says that there were hundreds of chariots and horses. And then there was the infantryman, and that's what Goliath was. He was a fighting machine. He had been trained. I was sharing with somebody this morning that somebody tried to rationalize the size of Goliath and why he was so tall. In fact, I've asked Logan to come up here for a minute. Would you just come up here a minute? And everybody knows that I'm 6'6", but let's suppose that this is David, and I would be a formidable foe unless you had a slingshot, wouldn't I? And so, but the size was obviously so much different for Goliath. You can go sit down, thank you. And so here he was, this fighting machine. But there was a person that said that Goliath had this disease, kind of like Andre the Giant has. We've heard of Andre the Giant, that they grow maybe I've got some of that disease. I'm thankful that I am only 6'6", and I have seen students at Hannibal Grange that were 7'1", very intimidating. I had a guy by the name of Adolfo, and he was from Venezuela, but he was 7'1", and he played basketball. And I don't like anybody that intimidates me, that's bigger than me. I don't like anybody that's got a deeper voice, but certainly he was. And so here we see that the Philistines have gathered up on one side of the valley of Elah, and the Israelites are on the other. And there was a tradition in those days that to avoid a lot of bloodshed, that often their best soldier would come out. Let me share one more thing. There was the infantry, and then there was the artillery. And for all intensive purposes, David would have fit into the artillery. And the artillery was much like our modern day military would be. They had their military weapons. And those with slingshots, a lot of them were archers. Archers were proficient. But I am told that for those that were proficient with a slingshot, that they could hurl a 4-pound rock just the size of a baseball at an accuracy of 200 yards. And you get an army of artillery that has slingshots, and they could do a lot of damage. And those, when David would eventually come before him, they say that David would hurl that stone at a speed of greater than the fastest baseball pitcher that you could imagine. So we're talking anywhere from 90 to 105 miles per hour that this ball, the size of a baseball, this stone that David had picked out, weighing about 4 pounds, is going to sail right into the forehead of this formidable giant that they were facing. And so it talks about it, and it says that he was over 9 feet tall. In fact, some translations talk about cubits and a half or whatever, but he was 9 foot 9 inches tall. I heard a pastor in a sermon that I was watching the other day talked about him being 6'9", and I thought, he was taller than that. Some say that he was, because of the disease that he had, that his eyesight was affected and he couldn't see, and that's why he had to be led out to the battlefield to battle with young David by his armor bearer. And that's why he said, who do you think you are? You think I'm a dog that you come out here and fight with me with sticks? Well, the only stick that David had was his staff in one hand and his sling in another. I'd like to think that, when I think of David, that David was probably the first example of concealed carry that we know of. You know that? I mean, when his daddy told him to go out to the battlefield and check on his brothers and take a little food out there, David, he snuck in his sling and he put it in his back pocket. And he went out there. I come up with a name for that. I call it, I'm thinking that we're talking a 50 millimeter stone ball that he's going to fire into the face of his opponent. And so I called it the single shot holy hurler. Isn't that good? I think we can do another sermon on that. The single shot holy hurler. But that was the battle line, and as they lined themselves up, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of Philistine camp and was over 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. And a shekel weighs about 4/10 of an ounce. And so if you figure that up, they tell me the armor alone that Goliath had was about 120 pounds. And not only did he have that, but he had a helmet that was made out of bronze, and he had his legs wore bronze greaves, and he had a bronze javelin was slung on his back, and his spear shaft was like a weaver's rod. Now, I was a little bit questionable about what a weaver's rod is, and it indicates that a weaver's rod was referring to the size of Goliath's arms. And so I'm thinking that this shaft, or this javelin, or this spear that he had, the shaft, as big, or could have been as big, as the arms of Goliath. That's a big, the head of it, the shaft was like a weaver's beam, and the iron point weighed 600 shekels, or about 20 pounds. Now guys, I want you to think about track and stuff. Did you know a shot put, the normal weight of a shot put, that they have to, and they throw it 30 feet. It's 16 pounds. So you can imagine this formidable foe that David was facing. And then, as we see this, Goliath would come out and he would taunt the Israelite armies. And he'd say, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you are the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. And if he's able to fight and kill me, we'll become your subordinates. But if I overcome and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." And then the Philistines said, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel." You know, there's one thing that really torqued David off, is that anybody would defy the ranks of Israel and their God. I was in a well-known gas station in New London, Missouri, not too long ago. But there was a man, and I feared even to turn around and look at him. But the language that spewed out of his mouth was nothing short of putrid, of foulness. And I wanted, and I still want to go back and be caught in that situation to where I can confront that man about the putridness of his mouth. You kiss your mother with that mouth? And but that was the mouth that Goliath had, and he taunted the nation of Israel. So in comes David. And David, he was the son of Jesse. He was the 8th son, I believe he was. And he came in and it says, now Jesse, he'd come home from the shepherd fields, and Jesse said to his son David, "Take the ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp, and take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of the unit, and see how your brothers and bring back some assurance from them." And there was Saul. And so he goes and he sees this, and the first thing that he hears was this taunting that comes out of the mouth of this behemoth of a man. And immediately he is offended. He says, now the Israelites have been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give his wealth, great wealth, to the man who kills him, and he'll also give him his daughters in marriage." We talked about that last week. "And will exempt his father's family from all taxes." I'll tell you what, that'd be a big benefit today, wouldn't it? If he would do that. And David is offended. And he was asking the men standing near him, and says, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel?" And he says to them, he says, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that should defy the armies of the living God?" I tell you what, my brothers, that I think that there is a message in that at all. That we ought to be giant slaying Davids, servants of the Lord that are offended greatly at the defiance of our God and those who speak ill of the God that we serve. And David was. And as he was inquiring about this, his brother Eliab, the oldest one, heard him speaking with the men, and he became indignant about David being there. And he went and asked him, "Why have you come down here? To show yourself off? To be conceited?" A number of things he said there. And David says, "What have I done?" And he turned around as if to avoid the opposition of his brothers, and he began to further inquire about this man. And the result is, as he said, I'll go and fight him." And the word got around, and it got back to Saul. Saul brought him in, and it comes into the third part of David's audience with Saul. And Saul said, "You're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him." You're only a boy. He's been fighting men from his youth. And David says, well, you know, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, he said, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. And when it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Now I'm going to tell you, this is one bad little shepherd. I remember my days of the only opportunity I had to go bear hunting with my son was, I can tell you this out of the whole experience, is there is nothing more frightful than being a minimum of 10 miles away from anybody I knew in the Canadian wilderness, up in a tree. It has gotten so dark that I cannot see clearly each bear, but I remember counting at least 6 black bear under me as if the silhouettes walking around. And I can't imagine crawling down out of that tree and saying, come here, Blackie, I want to grab you by the hair and smack you on the face. And then yet we see that David did that. You know what? I believe that we talked about this morning, that David, and we may just have to, can I just paint the picture for you this morning? And we'll come back and we'll look next week at the battle truce and how we can approach the battles and the giants in our lives. I just think it's absolutely amazing for this young boy and the great faith that he had to go against a formidable giant. One who struck fear in the lives of all of his brothers and those that were older. An entire Israelite army was trembling. It says that when Goliath would come out to speak, that they would back up and they would go hide because they were afraid of what he might say. Even Saul, the most likely man who would go and fight the giant, was afraid to go and fight him. And so Saul begins to outfit him with his armor, and he puts he dresses David in his own tunic. He puts a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head, and he fastened his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. David was not. He said, I can't go out there in this. Here's the bare faith. That sometimes we look at all of the things that the world would have us to use in battle. We have all kinds of suggestions. But you know, my battle gear might not be good for you. Your battle gear may not be good for me. And certainly Saul's battle gear was not for him. But you know what he used? It says that he took his staff in his hand and he chose 5 smooth stones. And we know that the reason he took 5 was because, I believe in 1 Samuel 22, that indicates that Saul had 4 brothers, or 4 sons, I believe it was. And David was just going the extra stones to be ready in case those 4 brothers would retaliate. He was confident he was going to kill this giant, this Goliath. I believe he was equally confident that if he needed to, he would kill the 4 sons of Goliath. My dad was that way. My dad was with deer hunting season coming on, and my dad was one of those guys that he always said, he'd say, Jimmy, you got ammunition for your 30-06? And I'd say, yeah, Dad, I've got a box here. He said, all you need is 1 shell. I said, 1 shell? He said, yeah, it's good enough for 2 deer if they're lined up right. That was the confidence he had. That was so much of truth in our family that when we buried my dad, that one of my siblings put a 30-30 shell in his pocket. And that's the way he went to his grave, with a 30. Along with the $20 bill, which Dad never went anywhere without a little bit of money. And we never knew what happened to that $20 bill, but it was gone when the casket was opened up. But he went with a 30-30 shell in his pocket because he was confident of that. And David was likely confident, and he took those 5 stones. And I'm thinking that, you know, here's a young boy he's ruddy and he's athletic, and he picks 5 stones that weigh about 4 pounds apiece, and he puts them in his bag. And so we're talking about 20 pounds of rocks hanging on his side. And as he goes out to meet this Philistine, the Philistine comes to him and he says, in fact he laughed. So what do you think I am, a dog? Did you come at me with sticks and a sling and a stone? And David says he looked David over and saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. And he said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And David said to the Philistine, you come over here, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. I think that from the church today, that is the attitude for battlement in the battle that we have. And Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 6 about our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and the evil things of this world that we fight in every day. We shouldn't be fighting each other in churches and competing against other churches, but we should be one formidable army that is fighting the wickedness of this world. And as you all know, we saw another week go by in which there were multiple murders in a Jewish synagogue this week. Nothing short of evil in our midst. And David had that faith of a young boy and a child to go before and to fight the enemy. And in fact, as he responded to them, he says, today I'll give your carcasses. I'll give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. Can you imagine, church? Can you imagine the audacity and the confidence that we would have as children of God and as a church to not be the underservant or to be the underdog, but to be rather the formidable force that the formidable force fears most. And that's the kind of person David was, that he feared God, and he had no fear for this man, this behemoth of a man. And he says, I'll take your carcasses and I'll feed them to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth. Verse 47 says, and all of those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you all into our hands. And as the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly. Remind you that he was carrying 20 pounds of ammunition in his sack, and he moved quickly, and as he was moving, he was swinging that sling, and Goliath, maybe he was standing there in utter dismay and disbelief that a young boy would come at him, which is what the world ought to look at us as the church, is that in disbelief at the power and expertise that we take. The Benjamites were well known for their ability to take a sling and to, it said that, and I can't tell you where the scripture was, but it tells us that they were proficient and not miss a hair. Not miss a hair with a slingshot. And I'm thinking, we've talked about how David had served as a shepherd for his father, and he had a lot of practice. Certainly I think that is. Maybe it was a desire of his to be the best sling artilleryman in the whole Israelite army one day. Also says that David was brought into the king's Saul's presence, and he served him as a entertainer for a while. But Saul was a Benjamite. Saul's people knew how to use a slingshot. Maybe David's expertise was perfected when he came into the service of Saul. But he ran and he swung that stone, and when he released it, it says that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. And so David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. And he ran and stood over him, and he took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the scabbard, and after he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. I may be a little bit, have a little bit of meanness in me here, and it might be a little bit of political meanness, but I recall a certain president of the United States that said when he became the president of our United States that he was going to cut off the head of the evil. Well, I know that she is still existing. She's still running around, as well as, y'all forgive me if that's offensive to you, but I believe that what it really needed was the head cut off, and that's what David did. Be it he may have killed him, be it he may have knocked him out, but one thing's for sure is that David wanted the Philistine army to know that this guy is not going to raise again. I would venture to say that when David ran over there, that like his spear and his javelin, that the sword, the scimitar of Goliath was just as big and just as heavy. And when he pulled it out of Goliath's scabbard, that David, with all of his strength and all of his might as a young boy, he raised it up and he began to hit maybe one time, maybe two times, maybe several times to sever the head of Saul. But one thing's for sure, David killed his giant. And next week, I want to take some time to tell us and to share with you, even expound in my own knowledge of what it takes. What kind of a battle plan should we have to kill giants? And I'm confident this morning. It's been shared in prayers here this morning that in this small congregation there are probably no doubt dozens of us. I thought of our young people. You know, that we all fight giants in our life. And I thought of our young people and how they fight bullying and things at school and teasing and things of those natures that go on at school. That our young people have giants in their life. I had a 22-year-old great-nephew this week that committed suicide because he had a giant in his life. Went into his bedroom with a shotgun and killed himself because he had a giant. But it only shows us that our kids, our young people, have giants in their life. Dads, grandparents, we need to be ever watchful for the giants in our kids' lives, because they're not going to tell you about them. But they can be very devastating. Come back next week, would you? Let's talk about a battle plan for giants in our lives. Father, we thank you this morning. We thank you that, Father, you love us enough to provide for us a means to escape bad situations. Father, I'm not so naive to think that you don't use those situations. You did with Job. The fact is, the Bible says that when all of the angels had gathered together and we're talking about the Lord's servants, and the Lord says, have you considered my servant Job? And we know the circumstances that surround that. And sometimes, Father, you put giants in our lives to strengthen us and to make us strong in our lives and in our walk with you. But you've always given us a means to fight them. And I pray, Father, that you'd reveal that to us in the next week to come. But in the meantime, Father, I pray this morning that maybe there's somebody here that maybe they just can't wait till next week. And they've got a giant in their life and they just want to come and acknowledge that, which is really the first step in slaying giants, is just to acknowledge that we have it. So I pray, Father, as we open up this time for response to the gospel, I pray, Father, that we be found faithful as you yourself are even more faithful than we are. And so bless us, I pray, during this time. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Let's stand.